Vantage this week. If you missed our shows in the last few days, this is for you. It's a roundup of the week gone by, the biggest developments, the biggest newsmakers and the most important analysis. The G20 summit may be over, but New Delhi is basking in the success. Our top story is about Make in India. Looks like it has some global fans, including Russian President Vladimir Putin. He praised India's pursuit of self-reliance. We'll discuss why this is important. Meanwhile, Justin Trudeau was finally able to leave India. He was stranded in New Delhi for 36 hours extra, more than he intended to stay. We'll tell you why this G20 summit did not go down well for the Canadian Prime Minister. We had another story from the G20, a standoff between Indian security officials and the Chinese delegation. You must not miss this report. Also an exclusive interview with Piyush Goyal, India's Commerce Minister. We discuss trade, Canada and China. And are aliens real? If they are, why have they turned up in the Mexican Congress of all places? We've got all this and more lined up for you. Let's get started. India's G20 success is opening new doors. The Delhi Declaration was a victory for Indian diplomacy. The tides of global leadership are changing. India is steering its course with confidence and world leaders are taking note. Leaders like Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, is taking inspiration from India, it seems. He's praised India's pursuit of self-reliance. He's hailed the Make in India initiative. Listen to this.
We should learn from many partners of ours, namely our partners in India. They are mostly focusing on production and the use of the cars and vessels produced in India. And in this regard, Prime Minister Modi is doing the right thing by encouraging people to use the brand Made in India.
Prime Minister Modi is doing the right thing, he says. Putin is clearly impressed by Make in India. And this is not the first time he's praised this idea. He talked about the same in the month of June as well. Putin said Make in India has had an impressive effect and the idea is worth emulating. Make in India is in fact generating a lot of buzz. Yesterday, Apple launched new iPhones. For the first time, the company is selling Made in India iPhones on launch. We'll discuss that in detail in just a bit. But the larger initiative of achieving self-reliance through Make in India has completed 8 years now. And in these 8 years, foreign direct investment in India has almost doubled, from around $45 billion in 2014-15 to $83 billion in 2022. What do you think has enabled this turnaround? One of the biggest reasons is incentives. Many production-linked schemes have been rolled out. Manufacturers are getting concessions when they churn out products from India, and these incentives are in the form of tax breaks. They're available in 14 sectors, from mobile manufacturing to pharmaceuticals, automobiles, telecom, textile, even batteries. These incentives have helped boost FDI in India and unlock the potential of Make in India. The Russian president wants to do the same. He's making a push for Make in Russia. Putin is yet to spell out how he will execute this. But he joins a growing list of leaders aiming for self-reliance, from Chinese President Xi Jinping to US President Joe Biden and, of course, Prime Minister Modi of India. Every leader is pushing for self-sufficiency. In Russia's case, the need is more urgent. Russia faces serious growth constraints. There are tough Western sanctions. Leading Russian banks are being treated like outcasts. They are being cut off, or they have been cut off from the global financial system. And the Russian ruble is struggling. Last month, its value plummeted drastically. $1 was worth more than 100 rubles. In fact, 2023 has been a bad year for the Russian currency. It has been one of the worst performers this year. So Moscow has made some interventions. Russia's central bank has raised interest rates. It's a desperate attempt to prop up the ruble. It resulted in some recovery, but the fight is still on. This afternoon, $1 was still worth about 100 rubles. Then there is the challenge of inflation. Even Putin is unable to ignore this. Inflation in Russia is more than 5%, which does not sound very bad, but apparently President Putin finds it worrying, and here's what he said.
Of course, we need to influence this. But if we miss a situation that will lead to uncontrollable inflation growth, in the long run it will be even worse for the economy. Because in conditions of high inflation, it's practically impossible to form business plans.
According to the Russian central bank, 4% inflation is ideal. Anything above that is a problem. And Putin is talking about the same. High inflation usually leads to high interest rates, and no business would like that. That's because loans become more expensive with higher interest rates. Business owners do not have incentives to expand, and this hurts growth. And this is a trajectory that President Putin wants to avoid. But in this current scenario, self-reliance would be hard to achieve. And I'll explain why. Why would anyone invest in Make in Russia if interest rates are high, if the economy is constrained by sanctions, and if there is pressure to keep a war going? So Moscow is turning to New Delhi. Russia wants to attract Indian investors. The possibility was floated earlier this year. A Russian official spoke about this. He said Russian government agencies are working on a plan. Over 1,000 companies have left Russia since this war began, so there is a gap. And someone needs to step up to fill this gap. Russia is keen to offer that space to India. It has identified sectors where Indian companies could invest. Sectors like information technology, fast-moving consumer goods or FMCG, fertilizers, transport. This could be an attractive proposition, although implementation is not going to be easy. Western sanctions will be the biggest roadblock. They might block Indian investments in Russia. Payments and the flow of money will have to be figured out. And both sides are grappling with this issue. Recently, Russia and India started trading in their native currencies. There is money in the bank. But Russia is facing some problems. They have billions of Indian rupees. They don't know how to use it. Last week, the Russian foreign minister spoke about this. Sergei Lavrov said, India is working on a solution. It could allow Moscow to invest this money. The where and the how are yet to be figured out. But this, remember, is a very crucial piece of the puzzle. Without solving it, without figuring out the payment mechanism, any new proposal will be a non-starter. Our next story is about Justin Trudeau. His trip to India has been disastrous. A textbook example of Murphy's Law. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. That's Murphy's Law, and that's the story of Justin Trudeau's India visit. First, he was pulled up by the Indian Prime Minister, the Indian leadership. Then he could not fly back home. He was supposed to leave on Sunday, but his plane broke down. It's Monday night in New Delhi now, and the Canadian delegation is still here. They've not been able to fix the plane and go back home. And I'm guessing they're not in a hurry, because when they land in Canada, they will meet a flood of criticism. International media in general, and the Canadian media in particular, have been unsparing. I'll show you some examples. The Toronto Sun on Sunday, this is what they said. This way out, Trudeau finds he has few friends in India. Now look at Bloomberg. Trudeau is stuck in India with faulty aircraft after hearing criticism from Modi. Then we come to Reuters. This is what they've said. Modi scolds Trudeau over Sikh protests in Canada against India. It was quite bad, but hardly surprising. The India-Canada relationship has hit rock bottom, and Trudeau only has himself to blame for this. His politics is poisoning the relationship. He has given Khalistanis a free run in Canada. This year, on 2 separate occasions, India summoned the Canadian High Commissioner in New Delhi, and on both occasions over the same issue, Khalistan. Canada refuses to act against Khalistani terrorists on its soil. India condemns this inaction. Yesterday, on the sidelines of the G20 summit, the issue came up again. Prime Minister Modi conveyed his displeasure personally. He met the Canadian PM briefly for barely 15 minutes. And Prime Minister Modi did not mince his words. He said, there are extremists in Canada. They're indulging in separatist activities and inciting violence against Indian diplomats. They're damaging India's diplomatic premises and threatening the Indian community. Prime Minister Modi also conveyed that these separatists have links to organized crime, drug syndicates and human trafficking. After the meeting, Trudeau was asked about this frosty exchange. And here's what he said.
Obviously, Canada will always defend freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of peaceful protest. That's something that's extremely important to us. At the same time as we're always there to prevent violence, to push back against hatred. I think on the issue of the community, it's important to remember that the actions of the few do not represent the entire community or Canada.
You heard what he said. Canada will defend freedom of expression, as they should. This is Trudeau's go-to defense, and it holds no water in this case. Attacking Indian diplomats is not freedom of expression. Threatening to assassinate the Indian Prime Minister is not freedom of expression. Khalistanis bombed an airplane, for God's sake. They carried out the worst terror attack on Canadian soil. They took more than 300 lives. Would Prime Minister Justin Trudeau call it freedom of expression? His defense is not just tone deaf and plain wrong. It's an affront to Indian sovereignty and to common sense, if I may add. Even as he was enjoying Indian hospitality, Khalistanis were in action in Canada. On Sunday, they took to the streets of Vancouver. Reports say there was a large crowd, over 5,000 people, according to some accounts. And they were being led by this man, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, a Khalistani terrorist and a spokesperson of a group called Sikhs for Justice. India has banned this group. The government of India has designated this man as a terrorist. But the government of Canada, under Justin Trudeau, gives him a free rein. He operates freely in Canada. Take a look.
This is a message to those who assassinated Najjar. We are calling for your political death. Asi karange thoda rajsi qatal. Modi, Jai Shankar, Dawal, Shah, we are coming for you. We are coming with the might of the pen and we are using the international laws. Yes, we are going to challenge the territorial integrity. Yes, we are going to challenge the sovereignty. We are going to balkanize India.
In this rally, he was openly giving calls to break up India. He said, we will balkanize India. He's threatening to attack Indian leaders. He was inciting the crowd against India. And what did the Canadian authorities do? Did they stop Pannu? Did they arrest him? They did not. Instead, they are facilitating a referendum that pushes for the creation of Khalistan, that pushes for the breakup of India. And let me repeat, all of this is being facilitated by the government of Canada while their Prime Minister is still in India. No wonder they got a dressing down from Prime Minister Modi. And he's being slammed by Canada's opposition too. The country's main opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, has said, and I quote, "Putting partisanship aside, no one likes to see a Canadian Prime Minister repeatedly humiliated and trampled upon by the rest of the world." He shared that front page of the Toronto Times with this post. And this is not the first time that Justin Trudeau has been snubbed and scolded in India. He came for a long visit in 2018. Some of you may remember it was equally disastrous. He tried to woo India. He dressed in Indian attire, visited a temple, went to the Taj Mahal, even showed his Bhangra moves at a High Commission event. No one was impressed. The photo ops were overshadowed by a scandal. Trudeau's office invited a Khalistani for a reception. They withdrew the invite later, but by then the damage was done. Justin Trudeau had egg on his face and he admitted it. Let me quote from what he said about his 2018 visit to India. He called it, and I'm quoting, a blaring, negative, wall-to-wall international ridicule. So he knows that it was a big flop. And he has learned no lessons. In fact, he made it worse the second time, this time. And his broken down plane is perhaps the cherry on the top. Justin Trudeau, with his disastrous India policy and his appeasement of Khalistani terrorists, has become a national embarrassment for Canada. And now let's talk about the India-China standoff. No, I'm not talking about the one at the border. This was a standoff during the G20 summit. It happened at a 5-star hotel, the hotel where the Chinese delegation was staying. They were at the Taj Hotel in New Delhi. It played host to many elite delegates, like Brazil's President Lula da Silva. And Brazil, you know, is the next host of the G20. So important delegations stayed in this hotel. The Chinese delegation was at the same hotel. And they threw a lot of tantrums. So much so that their actions led to a tense face-off. Members of the Chinese delegation arrived on Thursday. And this was an advance team. The Chinese premier reached New Delhi a day later, that is on Friday. Now, Friday, of course, was the day before the summit was about to begin. So before the premier came, some of his team was already here. They were put through a security check, which is routine procedure. Everyone goes through this for their own safety. In this case, the hotel security team noticed some bags. Reports say they looked unusual. Their dimensions seemed off. but they were labelled as diplomatic baggage. Now, Indian security officials were also present. They too saw the bags and they let them go. This was as per protocol. A diplomatic bag, also known as a diplomatic pouch, is like a container. It is used by countries to send documents or messages, sometimes even some articles or things, and this diplomatic bag or pouch is protected under the Vienna Convention, no matter the urgency. No other country can open this bag. No other country is allowed to take a look inside. And Indian officials followed this rule. These unusual-looking Chinese bags were labelled diplomatic, so they were allowed inside. The Chinese officials took the bags to their rooms, and soon after that, the Indian side got a complaint. A hotel staffer saw one of these bags. This person had gone inside the room and came out worried. So a report was filed. This staff member filed a complaint. They said there was quote-unquote suspicious equipment inside the bags. And that's when the Indian officials swung into action. The security team approached the Chinese delegation. They knocked on the doors of their hotel room. This time they asked for a closer look. They wanted to put the bags inside a scanner, a bit like the baggage scan that you see at airports. So the Indian officers wanted to scan the Chinese bags, and this is not against the rules. India follows the Vienna Convention, and the rule book is very clear about such situations. Let me show you something. The Protocol Handbook of the Ministry of External Affairs. What does it say about diplomatic bags? Such bags must have clear markings to begin with, and they should only have diplomatic documents or articles intended for official use. These bags cannot be opened under any circumstances. The rule book says that very clearly. They cannot be opened. But what about putting them through a scanner? That is perfectly okay. In fact, let me quote. Diplomatic bags to be transported as cargo or registered baggage shall be X-ray screened as per the security instructions in force. Such suspicious baggage shall not be transported until and unless the doubts are cleared to the satisfaction of the security staff. So that's all that the security officials wanted to do. Put the suspicious bag through a screening. China did not allow it. They put their foot down. They refused to allow any checks. And this led to a standoff. The Chinese delegation refused to cooperate and Indian officials refused to budge. They said they want to check the bags, not open them, just scan them. And this drama went on for 12 hours. Ultimately, the Chinese side came up with a way to evade scrutiny. They dispatched these bags to the Chinese embassy. And here we must praise the Indian team. Despite the pressure from the Chinese side, they held their ground. They pushed China to be transparent. A 3-member team stood outside the delegation's room. They remained outside for 12 hours. They left only when China decided to send the bags to the embassy. So what was China trying to hide in these bags? Why did they block the security check? Well, that remains a mystery. The suspicion is that the Chinese side had brought a jamming device or equipment used to communicate privately. In fact, the Chinese delegation was quite paranoid about this, about securing their communications. They even demanded a separate and private internet connection. This request was declined. What does this incident tell you? It is a glimpse into the psyche of the world's second largest economy and the people who rule it. That's China for you. Secretive, confrontational, and ready to kick up a fuss. Time for a Vantage exclusive now. Last weekend, India secured a major win on the world stage, a successful G20 summit with a joint statement that had 100% consensus. The negotiations went on into the wee hours. Many thought a joint declaration was impossible, but Indian diplomats made it happen. The question is how? How did India turn it around? We put this question to a key member of the Modi government who was in the thick of things, India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal. In an exclusive interview, he spoke to me about India's negotiation strategy, what other G20 members thought of India's presidency, and how it will impact India's bilateral negotiations, especially on trade. Also, is India open to investments from China, and why trade talks with Canada have been put on hold? We covered a lot of ground. Here's an excerpt from that conversation. Hello and welcome to this special interview. With me is Mr. Piyush Goyal, Union Minister of India, or should I say Bharat, sir. Welcome to Firstpost.
Thank you. Pleasure to be on your show, Palki ji.
It's an honor to have you. And let me start with a word of congratulations. India has just closed its G20 presidency on a high, at least the Leaders' Summit, and we had everyone, all sides agree to a joint statement. You have passed a cabinet resolution hailing the success of the G20. Are you satisfied with the outcomes?
It truly is very, very satisfying, very, very encouraging to see the trust that India during its G20 presidency has been able to earn from leaders across all sides of the fence. Very different viewpoints were on offer. It was a difficult time. Most people had given up hope on an outcome document. I think it was very deft handling on the part of the Honorable Prime Minister and the team which was working on it. And clearly a matter of great satisfaction that what we had set out to achieve when the presidency came to India, making it a people's G20, Jan Bhagidari, get everybody involved, get the nation feel connected to an important event like this, and come up with outcomes which demonstrate to the world that India cares for not only our 140 crore Indians, but for the entire world. I think that message has gone down very, very strongly from this presidency.
Yes, and like I was telling you, the Brazilian president, Brazil is the next chair, and they said they're taking lessons from India. You mentioned Jan Bhagidari. It truly was a people's event. And the people have one question in mind. How did you make it happen? You served as the G20 Sherpa in 2021. And while we see the decisions come out, we're all curious to know what goes into forging that consensus. How do you achieve something like this?
When we got the presidency on 1st of December last year, the situation was somewhat like what we hear of in the Charles Dickens book, A Tale of Two Cities. On the one hand, the times were good. On the other hand, the times were full of despair, difficult times. And the situation was challenging. We had barely come out of COVID. The war was still raging on. The East and the West were highly polarized, divided. And clearly, the G20 was addressing the challenges of a broken world order. At that point of time, for India to present such an ambitious agenda, which talked about the entire world coming together, which talked about the world addressing the needs of a long awaited better deal for the less developed countries, the developing countries, particularly in the global south. A world which was looking for inclusive and sustainable solutions, yet was conscious that it's a very, very different level of development that we see in different parts of the world, which means we have to be more accommodative, we have to try and come up with balanced and equitable solutions. So there were a lot of challenges, and in some sense, you get the best out of Prime Minister Modi when there is a challenge on hand. And we saw that happening in the G20. He led from the front. He was really on the front foot through the Indian G20 presidency.
How does the Delhi Declaration and the conversations you've had, especially over the past few days, how does it impact India's bilateral engagements with partners, especially on trade? Because we've seen a lot of focus on trade deals lately, and over the weekend we saw two in particular, the UK and Saudi Arabia. Which are the areas or regions we're focusing on to push for deals like these?
I think the biggest achievement of the entire G20 presidency has been trust. Bilateral trading arrangements or economic partnerships that we are pursuing with the UK, also with the EU, the 27-nation bloc of EU, who is our second largest trading partner after the United States. We also were in a dialogue with Canada, which for some time we are looking at to we've given it a pause to see how we need to take it forward going forward.
Why is that, if I may ask?
There are several reasons. We need to make sure that geopolitically and economically we are all on the same page. And therefore, the pause on the Canada discussions.
Are we not on the same page with Canada?
We are on good page, but we have had certain issues which are of serious concern. They have been highlighted in the bilateral meeting that the Honourable Prime Minister had with the Prime Minister of Canada. And we are hoping for resolution of some of these issues before we take it forward. So you will see that we have a very vast array of negotiations underway. In fact, most teams in the Commerce Ministry are actually doing two-shift working, a morning negotiation with one and another in the evening. And you really need to be very sharply focused on each negotiation because you are crystal gazing into 30, 40, 50 years into the future.
Is India open for business for Chinese investors?
Well, India is open for business for all investors across the world. We are fair to all countries. We would only like to make sure that we get reciprocal access, reciprocal benefits. We'd like to make sure that strategically India's interests are not compromised, and therefore India is a little cautious when it comes to investments from all our land bordering countries, whether it's China or any other land bordering country. We are looking at a little more cautious, calibrated approach.
The world is looking at diversifying supply chains, and most international companies are adopting a policy of China plus one, which is seen as an opportunity for India. And at the same time, there are other players like Thailand and Vietnam. They offer similar deals, similar advantages. They're vying for the same market. What is India's strategy?
Frankly, China plus one is a very popular terminology. Then you have anything but China, then you have friendshoring and nearshoring. All of these have been in public domain for quite some time now. And I do recognize that India also benefits when people are looking for trusted partners, looking for rules-based, transparent economic systems where they feel confident that they, and safer also. No Indian businessman disappears in the middle of the night for months and then comes out as a professor. But I think today, and more particularly after this G20 presidency, India has changed the rules of the game. The narrative is now very much different. India on its own stream, India on its own legs, today goes from a position of strength with self-confidence and engages with the rest of the world, invites investments, invites businesses to come and work in India. And I think it will no more be a diversification strategy. It will not necessarily be only about resilient supply chains. India will now become a compulsive destination. India will become the need of the hour. More and more companies are recognizing that the democracy, the demographic dividend, and the diversity, the 3 Ds that India offers. We have become an aspirational society, a young aspirational India which is going to drive and power India on its own stream. We will become the pole around which world economies will want to work and engage.
Thank you very much, sir, for taking all the questions and for all your time and for sharing your perspectives with us. And once again, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Palki ji.
We talk about politics every night on the show. Some of those events and stories are so bizarre, they seem otherworldly. But this one in Mexico truly takes the cake. The Mexican Congress held a hearing, their first hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomena, aka UFOs. They were talking about aliens. And they put 2 corpses on display. According to them, these were alien corpses with elongated heads and 3 fingers on each hand. Now, if you've grown up watching movies like E.T., these corpses may look very familiar to you. They look exactly like the aliens shown in movies. So, did Hollywood get it right? Is it time for a meet and greet with our otherworldly neighbors? Our next report tells you all about Mexico's extraterrestrial extravaganza.
What do you think the politicians of a country discuss, especially in Parliament? Well, you'd expect things like policies, healthcare, even education. But Mexico's Congress seems to have taken a break from national issues to dive headfirst into the paranormal. Mexico's Congress gathered to discuss the ever-elusive topic of UFOs. But quickly, one thing became apparent. This wasn't your average committee meeting. The star attraction, alien corpses. Yes, you heard that right. Bodies of extraterrestrial guests were put on display, all for the world to see.
This is the first time this evidence presented during the hearing is presented in such a form, and I think there is a clear demonstration that we are dealing with non-human specimens that are not related to any other species in our world, and that any scientific institution can investigate it.
Does that mean aliens are real? Well, let's not jump to conclusions just yet. This could just be a case of mistaken identity. I mean, take the corpses, for example. They have elongated heads, 3 fingers in each hand. At first glance, they're very similar to aliens that you see in movies. The bodies were allegedly found in Peru in 2017, and according to Mexico, they're about 1,000 years old. The aliens were displayed by this man, Jaime Maussan. He's a self-proclaimed ufologist and journalist. His theories have been debunked before, but he clearly doesn't give up. And while the aliens landed in the Congress, there were no saucer-shaped UFOs hovering over the building, or even any bright green invaders. Either way, the session was an unprecedented one. It took place 2 months after a similar one before the US Congress. Both sides debated whether aliens were real, but Mexico seems to have taken it one step further. It brought evidence and how. Which brings us to the question, are aliens real? Well, scientists have already debunked these claims. They call it a fraud. The Congress, too, hasn't taken a position on the issue. They're just listening to evidence. So, while aliens may not be real, this session certainly delivers on entertainment value. Mexico's Congress has successfully blended politics with sci-fi and humor. But it leaves many with one burning question. Are we alone in the universe? And if we're not, why have aliens ditched their favorite destination, America, for its southern neighbor? Is Mexico now their new favorite country? Well, who knows? Maybe like all of us, aliens also prefer tacos, tequila, and abortion rights.